He was an undefeated world boxing champion, proud, unstoppable, and adored by millions. When he spotted Chuck Norris sitting quietly in a small Texas bar, he thought it was his chance to prove who the real fighter was. But just a few seconds later, he realized, there are some legends you never challenge. Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The Texas sun had long since dropped behind the plains, leaving the sky awash in a bruised purple haze. Out on Highway 281, the trucks still rolled past in long, low growls that came and went like ocean waves. A worn neon sign blinked at the edge of the road, half lit, half dead, spelling out in weary red letters, Eagles Rest Bar. Dust clung to its windows like an old memory, and yet inside the world seemed to slow, as if the walls themselves had learned to hold their breath. The air smelled of oak, leather, and whiskey. Old ceiling fans turned lazily, stirring the haze of cigarette smoke that hung like the ghost of another time. Conversations moved in a low-hum, truckers trading routes, veterans playing dominoes, a few locals nursing beers with the patience of men who had learned to outwait their problems. In the corner, the jukebox played an old George Strait tune, soft enough not to disturb the stillness that gave the place its name. Behind the counter stood Manuel Rivera, polishing glasses with the methodical care of someone who found rhythm in repetition. He had a mechanic's hands, scarred, thick-fingered, strong enough to crush a wrench or calm a fight with a single gesture. At 62, his back still carried the posture of a man who had once marched in boots heavier than his regrets. There were framed photos behind the bar, a much younger Manuel beside a rusted military truck somewhere in Korea, another of him standing in front of this very building when it first opened. He had built Eagles Rest with his own two hands, board by board, and filled it with people who needed a quiet corner to breathe. At one of the smaller tables near the window sat a man who blended into that quiet as if he belonged to it. His clothes were simple, a light denim shirt, faded jeans, scuffed boots that looked well-traveled. A cup of steaming tea sat before him, untouched for several moments as he read from a weathered book. His hair had gone silver, his beard neat, and though his face was lined with time, his posture was impossibly straight. Every movement he made carried the same controlled precision, lifting the mug, turning a page, glancing out the window. He was not trying to be invisible. He simply was. Chuck Norris came to Eagles Rest for the same reason the old hawks roosted on the telephone poles outside, to be still, to see without being seen. He had spent a lifetime on stages and screens, fighting men who weren't real, saving worlds that didn't exist. Now he preferred the company of silence, the honest weight of an ordinary night. The regulars knew who he was, of course. They had seen his face on dusty VHS covers, heard the jokes, repeated the myths. But in Manuel's bar, celebrity meant nothing. Here he was just another man who wanted to drink in peace. Manuel approached with a steaming kettle and refilled Chuck's cup without a word. Chuck nodded once, that quiet, meaningful sort of nod that didn't need gratitude spoken aloud. "Still the quietest place in Texas," he said after a moment. Manuel smiled faintly. "That's because the loud ones don't stay long." Chuck chuckled softly, eyes drifting back to the book. "That's a kind of wisdom right there." "Not wisdom," Manuel replied. "Experience." He moved back toward the counter, setting down the kettle with a small clink, and turned to watch his patrons. It was a calm Thursday evening, the kind that folded into itself, predictable and kind. At the far end of the bar, a young woman worked the taps, her movements graceful despite the fatigue in her eyes. Her name was Latifa, though everyone called her Tiff. Her father had been a boxer, a middleweight who'd fought in church basements and small-town gyms until a broken jaw ended his career. She had inherited his spirit, his discipline, and for a few years she had trained herself until a torn ligament in her shoulder made sure she'd never climb into a ring again. Still, her hands moved with the memory of it, the efficient, balanced rhythm of someone who once understood the body as both weapon and language. She caught Chuck's eye briefly as she carried a tray of beers past his table. "You still reading the same book, Mr. Norris?" she teased, her tone light. "Or are you just pretending so people won't bother you?" He smiled over the rim of his cup. "A bit of both. Depends on the day. What's in it anyway? You've been through half that thing since last month." Chuck turned the cover slightly toward her. The letters were faded but readable. Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. A Roman emperor's diary, he said, about restraint, patience, and not losing your balance. She laughed. Sounds like the opposite of everyone I know. That's why it's worth rereading, he said, then returned to his page. Outside, the last light drained from the sky, leaving behind a deep indigo streaked with the orange glow of oil rigs in the distance. A few more regulars trickled in. The air felt easy, familiar. Latifa leaned against the bar between orders, chatting with Manuel about the weather and the price of gas. It was a small world, but it was enough. Then came the sound of tires on gravel, a low, heavy rumble that broke through the easy rhythm of the night. The regulars exchanged glances. No one new came down that road after dark, not unless they were lost or looking for something. The headlights cut across the window, and for a moment, the bar's interior glowed white. Then the lights died, and the door opened with a hard metallic clang that snapped every head toward it. 5 men walked in, or rather, 4 followed the one in front. The leader moved like he was used to being watched, every motion deliberate, shoulders squared, chin up. He was tall, dark-skinned, the definition of a heavyweight in his prime. His jacket gleamed under the hanging lights, black leather with a gold crown stitched on the back. The chain around his neck caught the light like a spark. His face was familiar to anyone who had turned on a sports channel in the past 5 years. Derek the Hammer Johnson, undefeated heavyweight champion of the world. His entourage followed close behind. 2 massive men who looked like they'd been carved from the same stone. A man in a designer coat holding a camera, and a slick manager type with mirrored sunglasses despite the dim light. They filled the doorway like a storm front. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the faint echo of George Strait remained. Manuel set down his rag. "Evening," he said evenly. "You boys lost?" The manager grinned. "Lost? Not a chance. The champ just wanted to grab a drink with the locals. Give a little love back to the people." Derek spread his arms theatrically, smiling for the camera. "That's right. Can't stay cooped up in penthouses all the time. Gotta show folks the real me." Latifa froze behind the counter, her mouth slightly open. She had posters of this man in her old gym. She had watched him fight in Las Vegas, flattening opponents like they were made of air. And now he was here, in this quiet bar that didn't even have Wi-Fi. Manuel's expression didn't change. "Well, Mr. Champion," he said, "we've got beer and whiskey, but no cameras." The manager's grin faltered. "It's all good, Pops. Just a couple shots for social. Champ likes to stay connected." "A masanti?" "No cameras," Manuel repeated, voice low, patient, final. Derek waved his hand dismissively. "Relax, old man. We're just having fun." He turned to the bar and tapped the counter with his knuckles. "First round's on me, whatever they're drinking." There was a pause. A few men nodded politely, unwilling to make trouble. Latifa moved to pour the drinks, her hands shaking slightly. Derek watched her, smiling. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Tiff," she said, forcing a smile. "Or Latifa." He grinned. "Like the Queen. I like that. Tell you what, you make my drink strong enough, I might just tip you like royalty." Manuel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had seen men like this before. Young, rich, convinced the world bent to their rhythm. He'd served soldiers before their first deployment and after their last. The difference was humility. Chuck hadn't moved. He'd looked up once when the door opened, then gone back to his book. But he could feel the energy in the room change, the same way a man senses lightning before he hears thunder. Derek's voice was magnetic, but sharp around the edges. Every sentence came with a challenge hidden beneath the charm. A few minutes passed before Derek noticed him. He turned from the bar, scanning the room, his gaze catching on the man by the window. For a moment he squinted, then his smile widened. "No way," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "No damn way." The camera swung toward Chuck's table. The bodyguards shifted. Derek strode across the room, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "I'll be damned," he said, stopping beside the table. "The legend himself, Mr. Walker, Texas Ranger. Tell me this isn't fate." Chuck looked up, calm, patient. "Evening." Derek laughed, loud and easy. "Evening? That's all I get? Man, I watched you kick a guy through a barn door when I was 12 years old. Movies, Chuck said, closing the book gently. Different kind of fight. Derek tilted his head, grinning. Maybe, but you still threw the kicks. Still look damn good doing it. Tell me, old-timer, you still got those moves? Manuel set a glass down a little too hard. That's enough, champ. Let the man be. Derek didn't look at him. He leaned closer to Chuck's table, his smile still there, but tighter now. I'm just asking, between two professionals. Chuck regarded him evenly. I don't think we're in the same profession. The silence that followed felt alive. Even the jukebox stopped playing, its last note hanging in the air before dying away. Latifah stared, her hands frozen mid-motion. The camera caught every second, the red light blinking like a heartbeat. Derek straightened, adjusting his jacket. You know, he said, his voice just a bit louder than before, I like meeting my heroes. Makes me remember how far I've come, from the hood to the top of the world. And now here I am, face to face with the guy who made kicking people cool. Chuck lifted his tea, took a slow sip, and said quietly, Kicking people was never the point. The champion blinked, thrown off by the simplicity of it. Then he laughed, shaking his head. You got lines, old man. I like that. He clapped his hands once. All right, folks, drinks on me. Let's make this night one for the books. Laughter broke the tension, but only on the surface. Beneath it, something had shifted, something inevitable. The storm had not yet arrived, but the air knew it was coming. Chuck opened his book again, and as the noise swelled around him, he read in silence. His reflection in the window was steady, the neon from outside flickering faintly against the glass. A few words from Marcus Aurelius came to mind, quiet and unforced. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. And as Derek the Hammer Johnson lifted his glass to the crowd, basking in the sound of his own name, the quiet man at the window understood that the night had just found its test. The next night, the bar was busier than usual, as if the echo of the previous evening had rippled out across the town and drawn a few more curious souls to its wooden doors. The talk was easy, unhurried, but something in the air had changed. Those who had been present the night before still spoke of it quietly, describing the electric tension that had filled Eagle's Rest when the heavyweight champion walked in, how the room had gone from peaceful to taut with unspoken challenge. Chuck Norris had returned to his seat near the window, tea steaming before him as though none of it had ever happened. Yet even Manuel, polishing glasses behind the counter, felt the residue of that energy, the faint scent of gunpowder after an unfired shot. The jukebox hummed lazily, playing an old tune by Willie Nelson, and the patrons murmured over their drinks. Outside, the Texas night was thick with heat, the crickets sawing endlessly in the darkness. Then through the windows came the low purr of engines, not one this time, but several. Tires crunched the gravel. The men who had witnessed the previous night's commotion traded glances. When the door opened, the heat spilled in first, followed by the sharp scent of cigar smoke and cologne. Derek the Hammer. Johnson returned like a man walking into his own kingdom. His entourage trailed behind him, his manager, his two bodyguards, and the cameraman once again, this time with a larger lens mounted on a stabilizer. Derek wore a dark red jacket that caught the light each time he moved, his grin flashing white against his deep skin. He looked every bit the champion he was, undefeated, unchallenged, basking in the glow of his own myth. Ladies and gentlemen, his manager called out, sweeping his arms wide as though introducing royalty. The champ's back to bless you all once again. There were scattered chuckles, polite nods, and a few rolled eyes. The regulars of Eagle's Rest were not easily impressed, but they were too polite to say so. Derek strode to the center of the room, his boots thudding on the wood, and clapped his hands together. Let's get some life in this place, he declared, his voice deep and commanding. I brought the party with me tonight. Manuel sighed quietly and met his eyes. This ain't a nightclub, son. Just a bar. Then it's about to be both, Derek replied, flashing his grin. He turned to the counter. First round for the house top shelf everything. Latifah, who had been stacking clean glasses, froze. Her stomach fluttered in a confusing mix of excitement and unease. She had admired Derek Johnson for years, memorized his fights, his footwork, the way his punches had rhythm like a song. But here outside the ring, something about him felt off balance. There was too much noise in him, too much performance, as if he were still fighting an invisible opponent he couldn't stop seeing. She poured the drinks while Manuel watched, arms folded. The sound of glasses clinking broke the silence, but the peace that usually lived in the bar was gone. Even the old men at the domino table sat still, waiting. Derek accepted his whiskey and raised it high. "To victory," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "and to the ones who can't stop chasing it." His friends cheered, slapping his shoulders, laughing too loudly. Then as he took a long sip, his gaze drifted to the window, and there he was again. The quiet man, the man with the book. Chuck Norris hadn't looked up. He sat exactly as before, posture relaxed but centered, eyes calmly moving over the lines of his page. The same teacup, the same silence. Derek's smile faltered. He swallowed his drink, set the glass down, and stared for a moment longer. His manager noticed. "You thinking what I think you're thinking?" he murmured. Derek's grin returned, but it was sharper now. "I'm thinking that man made me look like a fool last night." The manager laughed nervously. "You're the champ. You don't need to prove anything." "Don't I?" Derek said. He clapped him on the back and walked toward the jukebox, his voice carrying easily across the room. "Now I love country as much as anyone," he said, punching a few buttons, "but we need something with a little more fight in it." A moment later, a bass-heavy hip-hop track thundered through the speakers, drowning out conversation. He began to move in rhythm, shadow boxing between the tables, his punches slicing the air in practiced precision. The crowd parted around him. Some clapped, some rolled their eyes. Latifah watched, torn between admiration and embarrassment. He was magnificent, that much was true, the way he moved, the fluid strength, the coiled control of every muscle. But there was something hollow in the display, something that spoke of needing eyes on him. The cameras caught every movement. It wasn't fighting, it was performing. He finished his routine with a mock uppercut that made one of his bodyguards laugh out loud. "Still got it," Derek said, grinning, but the grin didn't reach his eyes. He turned to the bartender. "How about another round?" Manuel didn't move. "Keep it civil, champ," he said. "You're welcome here as long as you remember that." Derek's jaw tightened, though he kept his smile. "Always civil, old man. Always." He picked up his drink, but his gaze drifted again to the quiet figure near the window. "Some folks here could use a lesson in respect, though." "Let it go," the manager whispered behind him. "You don't need this." But Derek's pride was already slipping from its leash. He had spent his entire life proving he was the best in the streets where he learned to fight, in the gym where he earned his name, under the bright lights of arenas filled with roaring fans. Yet here was this old man, who hadn't even looked up when he entered, who had dismissed him the night before with a few calm words and a sip of tea. Derek didn't understand that kind of power, and that made him furious. He approached the table slowly this time, forcing a smile. "Evening again, legend," he said. "Didn't think I'd see you back after last night. Guess you like my company." Chuck looked up, calm as a still pond. "Didn't notice you were gone." A few people nearby tried to smother laughs. Derek's smile stiffened. "You've got jokes," he said. "But tell me something. How does it feel, knowing the world's moved on without you?" Chuck closed his book carefully, marking his place with a slip of paper. "You'd be surprised how peaceful it feels." "Peaceful?" Derek leaned forward. "Peace doesn't make champions." Chuck's voice was quiet but steady. "Neither does noise." The line hung in the air like a hammer waiting to drop. Derek's friends exchanged glances. One of them muttered, "He's trying to get in your head, D." The champion's jaw flexed. "Nah," he said, finally straightening. "He's just old. Probably forgot what a real fighter looks like." That drew a few nervous chuckles from the entourage, but no one else laughed. The regulars watched silently. Manuel's hand hovered beneath the counter where the old baseball bat was kept, though he hoped he wouldn't need it. Latifah felt her heart race. She wanted to say something, to stop what was coming, but the words wouldn't form. The energy in the bar had shifted, like the air before lightning. She could feel it. One wrong breath, and the storm would break. Derek turned fully toward Chuck now, arms spread. All right, tell you what, he said. Let's have some fun. Just a friendly match. You show me what those movie moves look like, and I'll show you what a real punch feels like. No harm, no cameras, just two pros having a chat. Chuck didn't move. He didn't blink. Not interested. Come on, Derek pressed. 1 minute. You might even learn something. Chuck lifted his tea, took a slow sip, and set it down again. I already did. That struck deeper than any insult. Derek's voice hardened. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've seen men like you before, Chuck said. Loud, strong, needing everyone to see it. You think fighting makes you powerful, but the strongest man in the room doesn't need to prove it. For a long moment, Derek said nothing. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, the camera lowered. The manager's voice broke the tension. Champ, let's go. There's nothing here for you. But Derek's pride wouldn't let go. He smiled again, though now it was a thin, dangerous thing. All right, legend. Enjoy your tea. Just remember, even mountains crumble when the right man hits them. Chuck's eyes didn't waver. Then you'd better learn to aim higher. The bar went silent. Derek's hand twitched near his glass, but he stopped himself. He turned on his heel, laughing without humor. Enjoy your quiet, old man. I'll be back when you're ready to talk like a fighter. He walked away, but the tension stayed, lingering like smoke. Chuck reopened his book. The first line his eyes fell upon read, Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. He read it twice, then looked out the window at the dark Texas night. Somewhere beyond the parking lot, thunder rolled low against the horizon. Manuel exhaled softly and moved closer. You all right? He asked. Chuck nodded once. He's young. He'll learn. Maybe, Manuel said, but learning's always loud before it gets quiet. Latifah approached, setting a fresh tea bag beside his cup. You think he'll come back? Chuck's eyes flicked toward the door where Derek had disappeared. Yes, he said simply. And when he does, he won't be looking for a fight. He'll be looking for himself. She didn't quite understand, but the certainty in his voice was enough to make her believe it. The storm outside grumbled again, closer now, but the man by the window looked as calm as ever. The night slowly reclaimed its rhythm, the laughter returning, the jukebox starting up again, though softer than before. Yet every soul in that bar knew something had shifted. The world's greatest boxer had just met something he couldn't hit, couldn't intimidate, couldn't understand. And somewhere, deep down, Derek Johnson knew it too. The following evening arrived heavy and breathless, with the kind of heat that made even the shadows seem sluggish. Thunder rolled far off beyond the plains, echoing like some ancient drumbeat. A warning that the weather and perhaps something else was about to break. Inside Eagle's Rest, the air felt taut with waiting. The regulars spoke quietly, if at all, glancing now and then at the window as if they expected someone to appear there. They didn't have to wait long. The sound of engines came again, a deep mechanical rumble that vibrated through the floorboards before it ever reached their ears. When the door opened, it wasn't just the hot air that swept in, but the presence of a man carrying his own storm. Derek the Hammer. Johnson entered slower this time, not smiling, not performing, though the camera still followed him. His entourage was smaller tonight, only his manager and one bodyguard, both of them uneasy. He didn't greet anyone, didn't speak until he reached the counter. Manuel stood waiting, his expression unreadable. Whiskey? Derek said flatly. Manuel poured it without a word, slid the glass across the counter. The champion downed it in one long swallow and set it back down hard enough to make the wood thud. Another. Take it easy, Manuel said quietly. You've already got too much noise inside you. Derek gave a short, humorless laugh. That what you tell all your customers? Only the ones who don't want to listen, the bartender replied, then turned to refill another man's glass. Derek's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He took the second whiskey, drank half of it, and stared into what remained like it might answer him. At his usual table by the window, Chuck Norris sat reading, the faint steam from his tea catching the dim light. The storm outside had begun to move closer, each roll of thunder a little louder, a little nearer. He hadn't looked up when Derek entered, though he'd felt it, the shift in air, the weight of a man dragging his pride behind him. Some energies were as unmistakable as scent or sound. When Derek finally turned from the counter, his eyes found him immediately. He walked over, glass in hand, every step a statement of something he couldn't yet name. Pride, anger, confusion. They were all tangled up in him, heavy as chains. "Evening," he said, voice low but steady. Chuck closed his book, folded his hands atop it, and met his gaze. "Evening." "I owe you an apology," Derek said, though there was no apology in his tone yet, only formality. "Last night I got carried away." Chuck nodded. "Happens. But I'm not sorry for one thing," Derek went on. "You disrespected me." "Did I?" "You did." He leaned forward, resting his fists on the table. "You called me loud. You said I didn't know what real strength was." "I said you mistook noise for strength," Chuck corrected gently. "There's a difference." The champion's eyes flashed. "I've fought men twice my size. I've been hit hard enough to forget my own name. I've bled for every inch I've got. Don't tell me about strength, old man." Chuck studied him for a long moment before speaking. "And yet here you are, still trying to convince a stranger you've got it." Derek flinched as though struck. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. Then he laughed, though the sound was empty. "You like playing philosopher, huh? You sit here with your tea and your little book, talking about peace. You think that makes you better than me?" "No," Chuck said, "just quieter." The room had fallen silent. Even the domino players had stopped their game, the tiles frozen mid-hand. The thunder outside grew louder, as if answering for the tension inside. Derek took a deep breath, trying to find a thread of calm, but pride kept twisting it away from him. "Let's settle this," he said finally, his voice rising. "No cameras, no audience, just you and me. One punch each. I want to see if that quiet of yours can take a hit." Manuel came around the counter, wiping his hands on a rag. "This isn't that kind of place." Derek turned toward him. "Then what is it? A retirement home for ghosts?" "Call it what you want," Manuel said evenly. "But there's no fighting here." The champion looked back at Chuck. "You're afraid." "I'm patient," Chuck replied. Derek slammed his glass down, shattering it. "You're hiding behind words." Chuck rose slowly. The movement was measured, effortless. He didn't tower over the younger man. Derek was taller, heavier, stronger, but somehow his presence filled the room. When he spoke again, his voice was calm but sharp as wind cutting through dust. "You think strength is about breaking something, but the world's full of broken men, Derek. It's harder to hold still than to hit." The name caught Derek off guard. "You know who I am." "I know what you've forgotten," Chuck said quietly, "that the fight ends when the purpose does. You still fighting the same ghosts that taught you to swing." Something flickered in Derek's eyes then. Recognition maybe, or something close to pain. For a moment, the axe slipped, and he looked not like the champion of the world, but like the boy who'd fought his way out of rough neighborhoods, fists up because words had never been enough. The silence stretched between them until the thunder cracked directly overhead, shaking the window glass. "Fine," Derek said at last, straightening. "If you won't meet me here, meet me outside. No crowd, no noise, just us." "I told you," Chuck said, "there's nothing to prove." "Not for you," Derek said, his voice tight. "For me." He turned and strode to the door. Manuel called after him, "You walk out that door with that fire still burning, and it's gonna burn you too." But Derek didn't answer. He stepped into the storm. The door swung shut behind him, rattling in its frame. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Chuck sighed, picked up his hat, and followed. Outside, the rain had begun, fat drops slapping the dirt, darkening it in spreading circles. Lightning flickered along the horizon, illuminating the highway for brief seconds. Derek stood in the gravel lot, shirt clinging to his shoulders, fists at his sides. The storm seemed drawn to him, its energy feeding his own. "You sure you want this?" Chuck asked as he stepped out under the awning. "I've wanted it since the moment I walked in here," Derek said. "You think you can teach me something? Do it now." Chuck's face softened, almost pitying. "All right," he said finally. "But remember, Lessons don't always come the way you expect. Derek dropped into a boxer's stance, rain streaming down his face. You throw first. No, Chuck said. You. For a moment, all that existed was the sound of rain and thunder. Then Derek moved a clean, fast jab that cut through the air toward the older man's chest. But Chuck wasn't there. He'd sidestepped, almost casually, so that the punch met only empty space. Derek pivoted, threw another. Missed again. Chuck hadn't even lifted his hands. Stop dodging, Derek growled. Then stop swinging, Chuck said softly. The next blow came harder, a full cross meant to end it. This time Chuck stepped in. He didn't strike. He simply placed his palm against Derek's chest, a gentle touch, barely enough to move him. Yet somehow it stopped him cold. His balance faltered. For a second, the fight drained out of him entirely. What was that? Derek said, voice shaking. First lesson, Chuck said. Control. Lightning flared again, bright as day. Derek stumbled back a step, furious, ashamed, confused. He came forward once more, throwing a body shot that would have doubled over any other man. But again, Chuck wasn't there. He turned with the motion, let the force pass him like wind. When Derek turned back, gasping, Chuck touched his shoulder lightly. Second lesson. Listen. To what? Derek demanded, breathing hard. To what's not being said. The rain fell harder, drumming against the roof of the bar. Derek stood panting, fists still clenched but motionless now. He didn't know whether to swing again or walk away. Chuck's voice came through the downpour, steady and calm. You came here to prove you can't be broken, but breaking's easy. Standing still, that's strength. For a long time, Derek just stared at him. The rain washed down his face, mingling with the sweat, the pride, the frustration. Then with a small shake of his head, he said, You talk like fighting's a sin. Chuck smiled faintly. Not fighting. Forgetting why. The champion exhaled, the breath leaving him like a surrender he didn't yet understand. The storm raged on, but the space between them had gone quiet. Chuck nodded once and turned back toward the door. Come inside before you drown. Derek didn't move at first. He watched the older man walk back into the glow of the bar, the light catching the rain like sparks. Then he looked down at his hands, trembling slightly, and realized they weren't trembling from cold. They were trembling because, for the first time in years, he didn't know what to do with them. He followed after a long moment, stepping inside again. The warmth hit him like a wave, and for a heartbeat he stood in the doorway, dripping rainwater onto the floor. Manuel was waiting with a towel. You done? He asked. Derek nodded once. Good, the bartender said. Now maybe you can start hearing yourself think. The bar returned to life slowly after that. Chuck took his seat again, reopened his book, and read as if nothing had happened. Derek sat at the counter this time, staring into a glass of water Manuel had put before him. Outside, the thunder rolled away, softer now, the storm losing strength. For the first time in a long while, Derek Johnson didn't feel like a champion. He felt like a man standing on the edge of something he couldn't name. A silence so complete it scared him. Yet somehow he knew he needed to step into it. The storm had moved east overnight, leaving the air heavy and clean, as if the sky itself had been scrubbed raw. Puddles shimmered in the dirt road like broken glass, reflecting the pale light of morning. The world outside Eagle's Rest was quiet again, but inside that silence had changed. It was no longer the lazy piece of routine. It was the charged stillness that comes after something sacred has been disturbed. Manuel felt it while sweeping the floor, while restocking bottles, while listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator in the back room. The sound of last night's confrontation. No, not a fight, not really, still echoed faintly in the grain of the walls. He had seen many things in his life, soldiers breaking down in silence, men realizing too late that they were not who they thought they were. But what he'd witnessed between Chuck Norris and Derek Johnson had carried a different weight. There was no blood, no blow struck, but something essential had shifted in the young champion. And Manuel knew such shifts rarely came without pain. By the time evening returned, the bar was full again. Rainwater had dried on the steps, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and ozone. The regulars had resumed their old habits, dominoes in the corner, slow music from the jukebox, but the talk was hushed, as if everyone expected the night to deliver another reckoning. Chuck was already there, seated at his usual spot near the window, a cup of tea steaming before him. He read quietly, undisturbed, the lamplight outlining the faint silver of his hair. To anyone else, he might have looked like a man waiting for no one, but Manuel had learned that Chuck never waited idly. His stillness wasn't emptiness, it was readiness. Latifah moved through the room, collecting glasses, glancing toward him now and then. She hadn't been able to shake the image of the night before, the way Derek had swung at him in the rain, how easily Chuck had stepped aside, how those simple movements had stopped the younger man cold. She'd grown up believing fighting was about domination, about the loud moments that won the crowd. But now she had seen something else, mastery that didn't shout, didn't celebrate. It unsettled her and inspired her in equal measure. The clock above the bar ticked past 9 when the sound of tires broke the evening calm again. Not the roaring engines from before, just a single vehicle moving slow. The front door opened and Derek Johnson entered. He was alone. The swagger was gone. He wore a plain black hoodie, damp from the mist outside, and no jewelry. His eyes looked darker, not with anger, but with exhaustion. He scanned the room once and then crossed to the counter, nodding faintly to Manuel. The bartender studied him for a long moment. "Water or whiskey?" "Water," Derek said. His voice had none of its old power. It was just a man's voice now. Manuel poured it without comment. Derek took the glass and turned, his gaze falling at last on Chuck. The older man didn't look up immediately, but something in his posture shifted, acknowledging him. Derek took a deep breath and walked over. When he reached the table, he stopped, waiting. Chuck closed his book, marking his place with a small slip of paper. "You came back," he said. Derek nodded. "Couldn't stay away." He hesitated, searching for words. "I thought about what you said, about noise, about fighting ghosts. I didn't like it. Still don't. But you were right." Chuck gestured to the empty chair. "Sit." The champion did, setting his water down with both hands. The two men sat in silence for a while, the hum of conversation around them fading into a distant blur. Derek looked older somehow, not in his face but in the heaviness that hung on him. "You know what it's like," he said finally, "to spend your life fighting so people will remember you. Every match, every round, every bruise. It's not about the other guy. It's about the world watching, the crowd, the cameras. You stop fighting and they forget you." "They'll forget anyway," Chuck said quietly. Derek looked up, frowning. "Then what's the point of any of it?" "The point isn't to be remembered," Chuck said. "It's to remember yourself." That silence came again, thick and weighty. Derek rubbed his hands together, restless. "Then teach me," he said suddenly. "Whatever it is you know. Last night, those moves, whatever you did to stop me. I need to understand it." Chuck studied him for a long time. "You sure you want that?" "I've never been more sure." "Then come with me." Chuck stood, placing a few bills on the table, and headed for the back door. Derek followed without hesitation. They stepped outside into the cool night. The parking lot glistened faintly in the glow of a street lamp. The air was thick with the scent of wet dust and pine. Beyond the light, the darkness spread vast and empty, broken only by the whisper of wind through mesquite trees. Chuck walked to the center of the lot and turned. "All right," he said. "Let's finish what started yesterday." Derek nodded, setting down his glass on the ground. "This time, no cameras, no talking." "Agreed," Chuck said. "Only listening." The younger man squared his shoulders, slipping instinctively into his boxer's stance. Knees bent, fists high, eyes fixed. His breath came slow but deep. He'd spent his life on the edge of rings, learning to measure distance, to read weakness. He was at home here, or so he thought. Chuck stood a few feet away, relaxed, almost casual. His hands hung loosely at his sides. His face was unreadable. Derek moved first, testing him with a jab, then another. Chuck didn't react. The punches sliced through the air, landing on nothing. Derek advanced, feinting left, then swinging wide. Chuck stepped aside with the precision of a shadow. "You're still hearing yourself," he said, Stop listening to your thoughts. Derek gritted his teeth and circled him. You're not even fighting back. Chuck smiled faintly. Neither are you. You're just remembering. The next strike came faster, sharper, driven by frustration rather than form. Derek launched a hook toward Chuck's shoulder, but before it could land, Chuck's hand rose, not to block, not to strike, but to touch. The palm landed lightly against Derek's chest, right over the heart. A simple touch, yet it froze the younger man where he stood. His breath caught, his rhythm vanished. What did you just do? He whispered. The first touch, Chuck said. Control. If you don't control your heart, it controls you. Derek staggered back, shaken not by force but by the sudden clarity that came with those words. He tried again, lunging forward, this time aiming lower. Chuck moved like water, turning with the motion, his hand brushing Derek's arm just above the elbow. The pressure was feather-light, but it sent a pulse through him that disrupted his balance, his certainty, his anger. The second touch, Chuck said. Listen, not with your ears, with your body. Every man carries noise in his movements. Until you hear it, you'll always be chasing silence. Sukrum, rain began to fall again, soft and sparse, dotting the ground with dark spots. Derek's breath came louder now, his mind racing. And the third? He asked, voice hoarse. Chuck's expression softened. The third is not about movement. He stepped closer until they stood a single pace apart. Derek didn't raise his fist this time. He just waited. Chuck lifted a hand and placed it gently on his shoulder, meeting his eyes. The touch was steady, grounding. The third is mercy, Chuck said. It's knowing when not to fight. Something broke inside the champion then. Not pain, not humiliation, but release. His arms dropped to his sides, his breath slowing. The sound of the rain grew louder, filling the empty space between words. For the first time since he had entered the bar days ago, Derek didn't feel the need to prove anything. The weight of his own legend fell away like an old coat. Chuck stepped back, nodding once. That's enough for tonight. Derek looked down at his hands, the same hands that had ended dozens of matches, earned him belts and trophies and the roar of thousands. They looked different now, smaller somehow, or maybe just human again. You stopped me 3 times, he said quietly, but you never hit me. I didn't need to, Chuck said. The fight wasn't with me. They stood there in the rain a moment longer before heading back inside. The warmth of the bar met them like an embrace. Manuel glanced up as they entered, saw the calm on both their faces, and understood. Latifah handed Derek a towel, her eyes wide but kind. Everything all right? Derek nodded, drying his hair. Yeah, he said. Better than it's been in years. He took a seat at the counter, ordered another water, and sat in silence. Chuck returned to his table, picked up his book, and resumed reading as if nothing had happened. Yet something deep in the room had shifted again, more quietly this time, like the subtle settling of earth after an earthquake. Outside, the rain tapered off. Inside, the crowd spoke in low tones, careful not to break whatever peace had just been restored. Derek sat there for a long time, staring into his glass, feeling the tremor in his arms fade into stillness. Somewhere behind him, Chuck's voice broke the silence just enough to reach him. A man's greatest fight, he said without looking up, is with the part of himself that fears peace. Derek didn't answer. He didn't need to. He understood now. For the first time in his life, the quiet wasn't something to fill. It was something to keep. Morning light slid through the dusty blinds of Eagle's Rest, cutting long, pale stripes across the worn wooden floor. The air carried that peculiar stillness of Texas after rain, a silence that wasn't empty but full, as if the world itself were holding its breath before deciding what to become next. Rosa Delgado, who had taken over the morning shift for Manuel, moved behind the counter with slow precision, wiping away the residue of the previous night. She had owned the place long enough to feel when something had changed in its walls, and after last night it was impossible to deny it. She could feel it in the hush of the regulars, in the way the jukebox seemed reluctant to break the quiet, even in the way the sunlight fell differently, softer somehow, as though paying respect to what had occurred. Derek, the Hammer Johnson, hadn't left until nearly dawn. After the rain had stopped, He'd remained at the bar, not talking much, just sitting with his hands folded around a cup of water that had long since gone warm. Chuck had stayed too, though not beside him. The two men had shared the same room in the way old soldiers sometimes do, not needing to speak because they already understood the language of silence. When Rosa came in that morning, she'd found 2 empty glasses and a folded napkin on the counter with 3 words written in neat block letters. "Thank you, Derek." Chuck. By mid-afternoon, word had begun to spread beyond the small town. Someone, somehow, had filmed a portion of what happened outside the part where Derek's hands dropped to his sides, the rain falling, the older man standing calmly before him. It was grainy, shaky footage, the kind born of secrecy. But it was enough. By the next morning it was on every fight forum, every sports blog, and more than a few news pages. The caption varied. The night the champ was humbled. 3 touches, silence versus power. But the sentiment was the same. What had begun in the quiet of a Texas parking lot had now entered the endless noise of the world. When Derek returned that evening, the bar was already half full. Conversations faltered as he entered. The champion no longer wore the gleam of spectacle, no leather jacket, no gold chain, no camera crew. He looked more like a man coming home from a long road rather than a victor returning to celebrate. The bruises on his face were faint now, but the change wasn't in his skin. It was in his posture, the absence of performance, the calm that had replaced defiance. He approached the bar nodding to Rosa. "Coffee," he said simply. "Not whiskey?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Not tonight." She poured it, setting the mug down without another word. He drank in silence for a long moment before glancing toward the window. Chuck wasn't there tonight. The chair was empty, as though deliberately left so. Rosa followed his gaze. "He doesn't come every night," she said softly. "I know," Derek said, "but I was hoping." She leaned on the counter, watching him. "You've been in fights all over the world. Why do you care what one man in a dusty bar thinks?" Derek turned the mug slowly between his palms. "Because he's the first man who ever fought me without hitting me." He smiled faintly without humor, and somehow it hurt more. Rosa didn't reply at once. She studied his face, saw in it the strange combination of strength and humility that only comes from defeat that isn't quite defeat. "Sometimes pain's just the sound of growth," she said. He looked up at her. "You sound like him." She smiled. "No one sounds like him. But I've listened long enough to learn a few things." They shared a quiet moment, the jukebox behind them playing an old slow blues tune. The hum of conversation filled the background again, soft and respectful. Derek finished his coffee, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that gleamed in the dim light. His championship belt, folded neatly, the gold faceplate dulled by time and touch. He laid it on the counter. Rosa looked at it, then at him. "You carrying that around everywhere?" "Not anymore," he said. "I came to leave it here." She frowned, uncertain if she'd heard correctly. "Leave it? You mean?" He nodded. "For him, for Chuck. I can't explain it, but after last night, it doesn't feel like it belongs to me anymore." Rosa touched the edge of the belt, tracing the engraved letters of his name. "This thing must mean everything to you." "It did," Derek admitted. "Every fight, every morning run, every drop of blood. I thought it was all about this. I used to wake up terrified of losing it. But now I think what scared me wasn't losing the belt. It was what came after. The silence. The not knowing who I was without it." He paused, breathing deeply. "And then I met him. And for the first time, silence didn't feel like death. It felt like peace." Rosa nodded slowly, her eyes softening. "You know, I think he'd tell you the belt isn't the problem. The weight you put in it is." Derek smiled, a real one this time. "Maybe, but I still want to leave it. For me, that's how I start over." He pushed the belt gently toward her. Rosa didn't argue. She understood symbols, understood how much heavier they could be than the metal they were made of. She took it and placed it carefully on a high shelf behind the bar, between 2 framed photos of old rodeo riders who had once been local legends. The belt looked strangely at home there, a relic among relics, no longer a trophy, but a reminder. When she turned back, Derek was watching her. "He'll come back," she said quietly. I know, Derek replied. And when he does, tell him I left this not as surrender, but as gratitude. Tell him he took the noise out of my head. The door opened behind them then, and a familiar voice said, "That's not something I take credit for." Derek turned, startled. Chuck Norris stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his expression calm as ever. He stepped inside, his boots leaving faint, damp prints on the floor. "You found the silence yourself," he said, crossing the room. "All I did was show you where to look." Derek stood, uncertain whether to speak. The two men faced each other for a moment, not as teacher and student, not as fighter and legend, but as equals in understanding. "You left something here," Rosa said, nodding toward the shelf. Chuck's gaze followed hers, landing on the belt. "So he did," Derek nodded. "It's yours now, or nobody's. Doesn't matter which." Chuck regarded the belt for a long moment before speaking. "You don't find peace by giving things away. You find it by carrying them differently." He looked back at Derek. "That belt's not a burden unless you let it be one. Keep it. Let it remind you, not define you." For a long moment, Derek didn't move. Then slowly he walked to the bar, took the belt down, and ran his fingers over its cool surface. "You sure?" he asked. Chuck smiled faintly. "You earned it. All I did was interrupt the noise for a minute." Derek laughed softly, shaking his head. "You've got a way of making everything sound simple." "It usually is," Chuck said. "It's people who complicate it." They sat together at the table near the window, the same spot where so much had begun. Rosa brought them both tea without being asked. For a long while, neither man spoke. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in wide strokes of amber and violet. Derek turned the belt over in his hands, watching the light shift across its surface. "I've got a title defense next month," he said finally. "It's already booked. The promoters want me to do interviews, hype it up like before. I told them no." Chuck nodded. "Good. I'm going to fight different this time," Derek said. "Not to prove anything, just to do it right." Chuck studied him. "And what's right?" Derek looked down at his hands. "Being present, being quiet inside." "That's a start," Chuck said. They drank in companionable silence after that. When the cups were empty, Derek stood. "Thank you," he said again, "for everything." Chuck rose too. "You don't owe me thanks. Just keep walking your road." Derek slung the belt over his shoulder. "I will." As he turned to leave, Rosa called after him. "You're welcome here anytime, champ." He smiled. "Maybe next time I'll bring a few less ghosts." When he was gone, the bar felt lighter, though not emptier. Rosa turned to Chuck, who had resumed his seat, opening his book once more. "You really don't take credit for anything, do you?" Chuck didn't look up. "Credit's another kind of noise." She smiled at that and went back to her work. The night settled into its familiar rhythm again. Music low, laughter gentle, the clink of glasses blending with the soft rustle of pages as Chuck read. Hours later, long after most of the patrons had left, Rosa found herself standing behind the counter, looking at the place where the belt had rested. It was gone now, but she could still feel the weight of it, the invisible gravity of a lesson learned not just by a fighter, but by everyone who had witnessed it. True strength, she thought, isn't about holding on or letting go. It's about knowing when to do each. She glanced toward the man at the window, still reading beneath the lamplight. The pages turned softly like whispers. Outside, the wind moved through the empty lot, stirring up dust that glittered faintly in the moonlight. And in that quiet, Rosa understood what had drawn him here all these years. It wasn't the tea or the peace, or even the silence itself. It was what waited beyond it, the truth that strength, real strength, wasn't something you proved. It was something you carried quietly until someone else was ready to see it. The next morning came with a crispness that hadn't touched that part of Texas in months. The storm had cleared the air, leaving behind a sky so blue it looked washed clean. The roads still bore the scent of wet earth and mesquite, and the birds, newly bold, filled the silence with song. Out by the edge of Highway 281, Eagle's Rest sat like it always had, an old wooden bar surrounded by nothing but open land and memory. The neon sign still flickered uncertainly, one letter dimmer than the rest. But the place itself seemed steadier somehow, as though something inside it had been mended that no one could quite name. By late afternoon, a few regulars had drifted in, nodding to Rosa and settling into their usual corners. The world outside was moving faster now, rumors, stories, videos spreading like wildfire. But inside Eagle's Rest, time kept its slower rhythm. Rosa had seen the footage of Derek and Chuck, of course. By now, everyone had. Someone had filmed the rain-soaked moment from across the lot, catching the stillness between them, the way Derek's fists had lowered, the quiet that followed. The clip had gone viral, which seemed both fitting and ironic. Millions of people now argued online about what it meant. Some called it humiliation, others redemption, but none of them understood what Rosa had seen with her own eyes. It wasn't a fight. It was a surrender of something invisible, something that could never be filmed. As evening came on, the sky turned the color of tarnished brass, the kind of light that makes even the smallest town feel like the center of the world. The door opened and Chuck Norris stepped in. His presence didn't startle anyone anymore. It never had, really, but it changed the air all the same. He moved with that same quiet steadiness, the kind that didn't demand attention, yet drew every gaze all the same. He nodded to Rosa as he passed. "Evening," she said softly. "Evening," he replied, removing his hat. She poured him tea without being asked. "He's not here tonight," she added. "I know," Chuck said. "He's got a fight tomorrow." Rosa leaned on the counter. "You think he's ready?" He was ready the moment he stopped needing to be. That answer made her smile. "You always talk like that?" "Only when people ask me questions with answers they already know." She laughed quietly and shook her head, moving off to tend to another table. Chuck carried his tea to his usual seat near the window. The twilight outside painted long, orange shadows across the floorboards. He sat there as always, not as a man waiting for anything, but as one who had finally learned to sit still in a world that never stopped moving. Hours passed. The regulars came and went. The jukebox played quietly, softer than usual. By 10, the bar had settled into its usual calm. Then as the clock struck 11, the door opened again. Derek Johnson walked in, wearing a plain gray hoodie and jeans. No entourage, no cameras, no flash. The look in his eyes was different, focused, grounded. He scanned the room once and spotted Chuck by the window. Their eyes met across the distance, and the corner of Chuck's mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, just a quiet acknowledgement. Derek made his way over and sat across from him. "Didn't think I'd see you tonight," Chuck said. "I'm flying out at dawn," Derek replied. "Figured I'd stop by first." Chuck nodded. "You could have just called." "Yeah," Derek said, smirking. "But that's not your way." "True enough." Chuck sipped his tea. "How's your head?" "Clear," Derek said. "First time in years." He leaned back, exhaling. "It's funny, though. The more I trained for this next fight, the less I cared about it. The promoters keep asking what my angle is. They want drama, story, revenge. I keep telling them there's no angle, just a fight. That'll confuse them," Chuck said. "It already has." For a moment they sat in silence, the low hum of the ceiling fan the only sound between them. Outside, the headlights of a lone truck swept across the window and vanished down the highway. Derek watched the empty road as he spoke. "You know what I realized out there in the rain that night? I've spent my whole life fighting not to lose, but I never once thought about what I was fighting for." Chuck nodded. "That's a harder question." "I think I know now," Derek said quietly. "It's not about proving I'm better than anyone. It's about being better than I was yesterday. That's it." "That's enough," Chuck said. They both sat there for a long while, saying little. Derek looked down at his hands, the same hands that had earned him glory, wealth, fear. They looked steadier now. "You know, I used to believe fear was weakness," he said. "But it's not. It's just a sign you're awake." Chuck smiled faintly. "Fear's useful if you listen to it. It's like a fire. Keep it small, it gives you warmth. Let it spread, and it burns everything." Derek chuckled. "You sound like my grandfather." "He must have been a wise man." "He was," Derek said, "but I didn't listen to him much. Guess I had to lose enough to start hearing things again." Chuck finished his tea, setting the cup down. "You're not done losing yet. Nobody ever is. The trick is learning how to lose without breaking. Derek thought about that, then nodded slowly. I'll try. Don't try, Chuck said. Do. The simplicity of it made Derek grin. You ever get tired of being the wise one? Chuck looked out the window, his reflection soft in the glass. You ever get tired of being the loud one? They both laughed then, a quiet, honest sound that drew a few glances from nearby tables. Rosa smiled from behind the bar, sensing the rare ease between them. When the laughter faded, Derek leaned forward. Tomorrow's fight, it's not just another title defense, it's the rematch. Carter Reyes. He's the only guy who ever took me the distance. It's supposed to be this big redemption story. And is it? Chuck asked. I don't know. I don't care if I win. I just want to fight clean. No noise in my head. Just clarity. Then you've already won, Chuck said softly. That line sat between them like a benediction. Outside, the wind picked up again, scattering bits of dust across the empty lot. Derek watched it absently. You'll watch it? He asked. Maybe, Chuck said, if they show it without commentary. They won't, Derek said, smiling. Too much money and noise. Then I'll watch it with the sound off. When Derek stood to leave, he hesitated, then extended his hand. Chuck looked at it for a moment before taking it. Their handshake was brief but firm, the kind that said more than words. Thank you, Derek said quietly, for teaching me how to stop swinging. Chuck looked him in the eye. You'll teach someone else one day. That's how it works. Derek nodded. I hope so. He turned to go, then paused at the door. Hey, he said over his shoulder. You ever think about coming to one of my fights in person? Chuck smiled. I've seen enough fights, but I'll be there in spirit. Derek nodded once more and left. The door shut softly behind him, the bell above it giving a small final ring. The next night, the bar was packed. The fight was being broadcast live on the old TV mounted above the counter. Rosa had nearly refused to turn it on. She didn't want the noise, but Manuel had insisted it would be different this time. And it was. The crowd didn't shout or cheer. They watched in silence as though witnessing something private. On screen, Derek stepped into the ring. No music, no fireworks. Just him. Bare chest gleaming under the lights, eyes steady, movements deliberate. His opponent, Carter Reyes, looked lean and hungry, every inch the challenger. The bell rang. From the first exchange, something was clear. Derek wasn't fighting like the man he'd been before. His punches were clean, measured, patient. He wasn't chasing dominance. He was listening, responding, moving with purpose. When he got hit, he smiled faintly, not from arrogance but from recognition. He was there, present in every second. By the sixth round, sweat poured down his shoulders, his breathing rough but controlled. Reyes came in hard, relentless, trying to goad him into fury. Derek didn't bite. He absorbed, shifted, answered. The commentators filled the air with speculation, their words tumbling over each other in frantic awe. But here, in Eagle's Rest, the volume was off. The only sounds were the soft clinks of glass and the steady rhythm of gloves striking leather on the screen. In the 12th round, with both fighters exhausted, Derek found his moment. A clean right cross, not wild, not desperate, just precise. Reyes hit the canvas, not violently but almost gracefully, like a man laying down a burden. The referee counted, and the fight was over. Derek didn't raise his fists. He didn't shout. He simply stood there, chest heaving, eyes closed, as the crowd around him roared. When the referee lifted his hand, he smiled. Not the grin of a conqueror, but the calm expression of someone who had finally come home to himself. Back in the bar, the patrons rose to their feet, clapping not out of frenzy but respect. Rosa smiled, tears glimmering faintly in her eyes. She turned to where Chuck sat at the end of the bar, his face lit by the flicker of the TV screen. He did it, she said softly. Chuck nodded. No, he said. He understood it. The camera showed Derek kneeling in his corner, head bowed, whispering something to his gloves. It wasn't prayer, not exactly. It was thanks. When the broadcast ended, the bar slowly emptied. Chuck finished his tea and stood, slipping on his hat. Rosa called after him. You heading out already? He paused at the door, glancing back. Storm's past, he said. Time to move on. Outside, the air was cool, filled with the distant hum of cicadas. Chuck stepped into the night, walking toward the horizon, where the last of the sunset burned low and gold. The wind moved gently through the fields, carrying with it a quiet that wasn't empty but alive. Somewhere far away, a champion stood in a ring under bright lights, and an old man walked alone beneath the stars. Both of them carried the same silence now, and for the first time, it sounded like peace. If this story kept you watching till the end, make sure to hit that subscribe button. There's more coming that you don't want to miss. Check out the next videos for more powerful stories like this one, and share this video with someone who needs to see it today.